Well, the expectations over here in Munich are absolutely huge. Donald Trump absolutely clear that there's going to be some sort of deal that emerges. Many in the European community aren't entirely as convinced. Shashank Joshi is one of the closest observers of what's been happening in Ukraine, Russia and Europe, the defense editor of The Economist. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Where are the Russians?
The Russians have not been at Munich for many, many years, and they're not about to start coming today. I think the great worry of the Europeans is that Trump will begin talking to the Russians before he has even spoken to the Ukrainians and the Europeans. And so at some point negotiations will have to begin, but the European anxiety here is to say, hang on a minute, before you go get on the phone, get on the plane to Moscow, get in a room one-to-one, as you remember President Trump did in Helsinki in 2018 without his advisors in the room. Talk to us first. Let's have a joint plan. But what we're actually seeing, as you know very well, and you'll have been hearing in the last few hours, is we're seeing a US approach that says, here's the deal, take it or leave it.
Where does Russia stand on this deal, whatever it may be?
Well, Russia
because
doesn't...
the Kremlin seems to be reasonably optimistic. They don't know, we want peace as well, let's start talking.
I would say Russia, any more than us, doesn't know what the deal is.
Right.
It doesn't know what it is. So far, the good news for the Russians is that they've had a series of unilateral concessions up front from the Americans. No NATO membership for Ukraine. No US support for European troops in Ukraine. No Article 5 support for those troops. And just as importantly, I would say, Trump offering a presidential visit to Moscow. This hasn't happened since George W. Bush. Trump offering to say we should have Russia back in the G7. Now, from all of these lines, Russia is delighted. However, it's going to have some unpleasant news as well. And as we speak, as we're talking now behind us, J.D. Vance will be delivering a message that says to the Russians as well, if you don't play nice, we can also go up the pressure on you as well.
There's also no going back to the pre-2014 boundary of Ukraine. That's the key, for me, the takeaway that Russia would be looking at. That, look, you know,
I think even the Ukrainians get that. You've been to Ukraine many times. You know that in private, the Ukrainians are pragmatic. They recognize they're not going to get Crimea back. For them, what is much, much more important than...
Donetsk and Luhansk.
Well, not even Donetsk and Luhansk. Of course they would like Donetsk and Luhansk, the Donbass back. But this territory isn't the core of this discussion. The core of this discussion is security guarantees. What is it that allows Ukraine to rebuild? You know, a few hundred square miles of territory. I'm not denigrating this for the Ukrainians. Of course, that is profoundly important to them. But what really matters is, could Russia invade again? And how do you ensure that never happens?
Where does that leave Zelensky?
I think it leaves him casting around for some other solution to this. And here are the options. NATO membership, well, the Americans seem to be ruling this out, although with Trump, you never say never with Trump. A European force inside Ukraine, I wouldn't rule that out. I'm hearing a lot of discussion about this issue. The French are pushing it. Some countries are skeptical, but it's on the table. It's being discussed. But I think we're probably heading towards the third option, which is we're not going to give you Article 5 NATO-type security guarantees that say we'll come to your aid and intervene, but we will arm you very heavily with billions of dollars worth of weapons so you can defend yourself against Russia.
But who's going to arm them? Because America seems to be saying we've already done billions in arms. We can't do this indefinitely. So
I don't think America...
The expectation is Europe.
I think
Europe doesn't have the industrial capacity.
Well, we're building it up slowly. It'll take a while. But I think the thing to remember here is the Americans aren't necessarily ruling out aid. They just want to get something back. And this is where the question of these critical minerals comes in. Zelensky saying to the Ukrainians, I may be willing to give you more aid, but I want to see something back. I'd like to see critical minerals back. And so that it may be a more transactional relationship. The other point on Europe, of course, that I'd remember is Europeans are sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars of frozen Russian assets. Now, to seize those would be a big deal in legal terms. But it is on the table, the money's there, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that conversation heat up again.
Where does this all leave Zelensky politically in Ukraine?
I think Zelensky has been struggling politically inside Ukraine. The Americans are now pushing the idea of early elections, an idea that even horrifies many in the Ukrainian opposition who know this would be exploited by the Russians. But Zelensky is in trouble. If a bad deal is imposed on him by the Americans on pain of withdrawal of aid, and he is in a difficult spot, make no mistake, he could face grave political difficulty. His government could fall. You could see protest dissent from from the Ukrainian armed forces, I think you would see a really serious backlash for him.
So would I be correct in saying that the Ukrainian Zelensky will be given a particular option over here, face to face? We're being nice with you. We're telling you what the options are. The Europeans will be told off that get serious about paying more for security. There's no Russian of consequence over here. Trump then picks up the phone again and says, look, I've done what I had to do, and now let's just get peace happening.
I think the important thing to remember is we must not overestimate the degree to which the Americans have thought this through. I just spoke to a very senior...
Or underestimate.
Yes. Well, I just spoke to a senior European official who said, I said, what is the American plan? Do you have any clarity over this yet in the meetings you've had in the last day? He said, I don't think they have a plan. So I have a feeling this is going to be well. It is, or if you're being more charitable, you could say improvisation. Right. With these discussions, this is why Europeans are not giving up. They're saying we just need to talk to the Americans and say, look, don't rush into this.
Yeah.
The Russians will play you. The Russians will make. As I said, I spoke to the Finnish foreign minister, and she said, if you do a quick and dirty deal, it'll fail, and you, Trump, will look weak.
Right.
So they're playing to his sense of ego, his sense of strength, and saying you may want to look strong with a quick, easy deal, but we know from the Middle East, seeking a deal and getting a deal and then enforcing a deal are three completely different things.
One final question. Trump in Moscow, Putin potentially in Washington. There's talk of a summit, I think, in Saudi Arabia as well before that. But we're actually getting to that stage when that will happen. Unthinkable till, I think, day before yesterday.
Well, this is when radical ideas begin to rise to the top, right? You look back to the 80s, Reagan meets Gorbachev in Reykjavik. What do they discuss? They discuss abolishing nuclear weapons. So when you have two men in a room like this, and things can happen, what worries me is that it's a pretty lopsided negotiation. On the one hand, a veteran KGB officer from the 80s. On the other hand, a real estate developer from New York who appears to be going slightly senile. And when I, as a European, look at this, I'm profoundly worried that Putin will propose to Trump, okay, you get the Nobel Peace Prize, we do a deal in Ukraine, I just want you to pull out of Europe, just withdraw from Europe, leave Europe to me. Trump says, hey, sounds pretty good. And as a European, I can't tell you I feel great about this.
Shashank, wonderful to speak to you.
Great
Shashank
to speak
Joshi telling us a little bit about his thoughts on what's emerging over here. None of us know where this is all headed. None of us suspect that even the Americans know. But one way or the other, there's going to be something important that comes off this. Will there be lasting peace? That's a larger question.